This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Hello and welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond at our premier broadcast time of 10 a.m.
Afore the footer.
Yes, before the football on a Saturday morning.
Today we turn to a vexed subject. It's 25 years since devolution came to Scotland. And we asked the question, has it made Scotland a better place? And crucially, has it brought independence closer?
And who better to turn to than that Devo sceptic but independista enthusiast, Jim Sillars, an MP for Labour, Scottish Labour and the SNP, and of course husband of the late and very great Margaret MacDonald. Now earlier this week, Alex was in conversation in Edinburgh with Jim, reviewing the last quarter of a century.
Jim Sillars, welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond. Once again.
You're welcome.
Now, you spent over a half a century.
More
than half a century in politics, certainly in a broad sense, trade union movement, Member of Parliament. The first half of that was Scotland without a Parliament. The second half, the last 25 years, has been Scotland with a Parliament. Which was better, Jim?
I actually tend to think before the Parliament, and I'll tell you why. Devolution was supposed to, bring a new politics to Scotland, and we've developed a political class which is a devolutionist political class, and I reckon that it's actually narrowed the Scottish political mind and parochialised Scottish politics. I'll give you an example. The last two SNP annual conferences, foreign policy never got anywhere near the agenda. Not because there was resolutions they didn't actually take. Nobody produced any. And if you listen to what's being said now, the arguments are all domestic. But we live in a world that is changing quite dramatically. When I was young, if you wanted to say something was bad, you said it was in a worse state than China, because then it certainly was in a worse state than China. World power has shifted from the Atlantic axis to the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. I don't get the impression that any of our political class understand that has happened and the consequences for us. We are 5 million people in a world that's changed profoundly in the last 20, 30 years. But if you listen to our people at Holyrood, it's déjà vu, déjà vu, déjà vu.
But is that altogether fair? I mean, after all, one of Hamza Yusuf's, it has to be said, relatively few strong issues has been what he's had to say about Gaza and the plight of the Palestinians. I mean, he clearly feels more comfortable on that issue. I'm not talking about comfortable about the tragedy and the carnage. I'm talking about being comfortable speaking about it than he does, for example, in most domestic policies.
But even the most narrow-minded person in the country, whether it be the UK, Europe or anywhere else, couldn't avoid Gaza at the present time. But if you probe a bit deeper, you have to go beyond simply protesting about what's happening in Gaza and saying things like, you're just simply echoing other people. A two-state solution is the answer to this. If you dig deep, two-state solution is going to be an exceptionally difficult thing to engineer. And it can't be engineered by any external forces, including the United States or anybody else. It has to come from within Israel and Palestine. And if you look deep into Israel and Palestine, the Israelis won't have it, Hamas doesn't want it, and if you did have it for a contiguous Palestinian state in the West Bank, you would have to dismantle all the Jewish settlements, which is a political impossibility inside Israeli politics. I don't think anybody in Holyrood, Hamza or anybody else, has got even to look at that other than simply saying what everybody else is saying, what's happening is a tragedy.
Or even to look at world institutions like the ICJ, the Security Council,
right,
how the United Nations imposes its mandates. But can I take issue with you? Well, you once wrote a book, The Case for Optimism, so I'm going to give you the case for optimism and you can comment on it. I mean, the 25 years of devolution, certainly for the first 15 years of that period, with a few ups and downs, Scotland looked like it was on the way to independence, not in the distant future, in the very near future. Okay, there's been a struggle over the last decade for reasons that you and I both know about, but that doesn't alter the fact that progress could resume if the correct decisions were made.
I'm not so sure, Alec. If you look at the intake, the first intake in 1999, there was high quality everywhere, right across the spectrum. If you look at what's happened since 2014, the quality of the intake has deteriorated very considerably. And I don't see any understanding by the political leaderships, I'm talking about all parties, of the deterioration in quality that has taken place. And mediocrity now reigns. And the key feature of mediocrity, it has to kill talent in order to survive. So we've got mediocrity making sure that mediocrity survives. I don't see anybody that really matters, now talking about academia or in politics generally, who is engaged in a serious examination of what has gone wrong in Holyrood. Why have we got mediocrity? Why can't we launch a couple of vessels to deliver tourists, to the Inner and Outer Hebrides? I mean, what's gone wrong there? Nobody really is looking at that. And if you don't look at it and you don't understand what's gone wrong, then you'll not put it right.
Although it might be argued you should look to the head of the civil service as opposed to the head of the government to explain the inability to enforce or even manage a fairly simple contract.
No, I don't agree with that at all. At the end of the day, if you, in your time, whatever disagreements you and I may have had, you had a grip of government. If you wanted something done, you had the political will and the heft to get it done.
But I had two good permanent secretaries, which, to be fair, I made sure I had two good permanent secretaries.
Yeah, but the two permanent secretaries wouldn't have operated as autonomous organisations unless you were the directing force. We don't have that kind of willpower at the present time. And I don't see anybody having a look, asking, why don't we have the willpower to drive things through? Why do we always say, oh, it's Westminster's fault, when in fact we are responsible for some of our own failings, whether it be in the ferries or whether it be in education or the problems with the NHS. There seems to be a total inability to think these days. And if you take education, we have 32 education authorities in a population of 5 million. And if you think about the bureaucracy involved in that, I reckon that 50% of the money in education never gets near the schools because it's absorbed.
There's certainly a few directors of education.
Yes, yes. I mean, local government hasn't been reformed since 1993. If you look at the health service, there's something like 21 organisations run the health service. Key ones being about 14 NHS trusts running the hospitals. That's an enormous amount of bureaucracy. So where is the imagination of people to say, where has it gone wrong? This is what's gone wrong. This is how we'll fix it.
You speak about deterioration of quality in Holyrood, but surely there's been a parallel, perhaps even greater deterioration at Westminster. I mean, the British state that the Scottish Parliament is now facing is the weakest, most inept British state that we've seen in our lifetimes.
Oh, I entirely agree. When I talk about mediocrity, I'm not just meaning north of the border. It's down and south of the border in spades. I mean, my view is that the United Kingdom is in its final stages of post-imperial decline. I think it was always in decline, but it tended to be relative decline. I think there was two major shocks to the UK system, which has not been able to recover from and won't be able to recover from. The first was the 2008 financial crisis, which it never recovered from. Then you got the mismanagement and mishandling of the pandemic when it trashed the economy. Two major shocks to the system, I think, has revealed that the United Kingdom is in decline, serious decay and decline. And that's reflected in the quality that you see in the House of Commons today. I mean, we talk about Trump and Biden, but if you say Sunak and Starmer, folk go, no difference between them. Neither can really excite the imagination or the belief in the population that they can actually do something to reverse the decline. So, from an independence point of view, I think the prospect for us has never been brighter. If we had the leadership that revealed the real state of the United Kingdom to the Scottish electorate and said, look, it's quite simple. In Scottish state interest terms, it's not in our interest any longer to be a member of the United Kingdom. That is a decaying, declining organisation. If we don't leave it, we will decay and decline along with them. So it's a question for us, do we escape or do we continue to get poorer along with the folk south of the border? Now, in saying that, I don't mean any harm to the people in England. I very much regret what is happening to the people of England. But 5 million Scots can't save 60 million south of the border, but we can save ourselves. That's the point we should be putting to the Scottish people day in and day out. Unfortunately, I don't think the leadership of my party, the SNP, understands that.
In a recent essay, Jim Sillars, you said that Scottish nationalists should look at unionism, look at unionists, their fellow country people. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, if we're going to win independence, we'll have to get well over 55%, because that's when you set the agenda and they won't be able to resist the calls for a referendum. To get there, there's not much point in you and me talking to each other about how much we support independence. We've got to go and talk to folk who don't agree with us to win them over, a sufficient number in order to boost the vote for independence. And that, I don't think the movement at the moment understands. The most important people in Scotland are the unionists. They're the folk who determine whether they come with us or don't come with us. And if they come with us, we can't be beaten. So we've got to have a different approach to our fellow unionists. I mean, I've said before, there's not much point insulting somebody to their face on the basis, you're a traitor to the country, and then saying, by the way, I'd like to have a conversation with you about independence. The eyes are closed and the ears are shut by then. We've got to start, I think, a better understanding of our fellow unionist citizens. What is it that makes them tick? What is it that keeps them thrilled to the idea that the union is extremely important as a safeguard to Scotland? If we better understand them, and And send them a message. Look, we do try to understand you and we do respect your position. We don't think it's the correct one, and that's what we want to discuss with you.
As a young politician, you were very vehement in arguing against independence, but then the European Union and the transformation that was taking place in the UK persuaded you to move to the nationalist side. There doesn't seem to be the same type of movement of significant figures in politics now. I mean, it's almost as if people are in silos and there's not much interchange, or people saying this new situation requires a different attitude. And yet you might have thought, for a lot of people, Brexit would have been the sort of shock. Let's forget one way or another what the arguments are. But Brexit would have been the sort of shock that would have made people have a fundamental reassessment. That doesn't seem to have taken place so far.
No, it doesn't. And I think part of the problem really lies, and we've got to be self-critical here, with the national movement. Because in dealing with people who are unionists, we've tended, some of the insults have been absolutely outrageous and atrocious.
Amplified, of course, by the social media.
Yes, and so you haven't got people who've been prepared to listen. And the message that we are sending has been all about the kind of Scotland that independence would bring. Now, that's hypothetical. I mean, we can't prove that we'll do this, that, and the next thing. We can say this is what we think we can do to achieve this particular objective. You can't prove it. So what I've been arguing very recently, because I've thought about this a lot, we've got to get the unionist mind onto a different tack to say to them, forget about our arguments about what Scotland can be. That's phase 2. Phase 1 is getting you to understand that the strong, powerful United Kingdom you believed in 2014, the reason you voted no in 2014, that United Kingdom doesn't exist. It's in serious decline, irreversible decline. Now, if we can say to them, this is how we would like you to look at a different reality, then I think we might make some progress. But if we keep talking about what we are going to do when we're independent, and you lot, are selling the country down, you can't be both Scottish and British at the same time, some of you are traitors, some folk are saying we're a colony and that you're part of the, rapacious colonisers. How are you going to get folk to listen to you?
Jim Sillars, you and I were involved in nationalist politics at a time when, if any poll had said 50% of the people were believing in independence, we would have been engaged in mass celebrations. We'd have been in the pub for a whole evening celebrating. So fundamentally, given that backcloth, is it a case for optimism or a case for pessimism?
But I think at the end of the day, it's a case for optimism, because if we're around about 50%, that's a launch pad that, properly handled, can take us much quicker than many people realise to the point where we become independent. 50% is a launch pad. If you get to 55%, then, we set the agenda. We determine what happens. So I have moments of utter despair at the moment. Someone asked me about a year ago, how are you feeling? And I said, well, I've a split personality. To which he said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And I said, look, on the family side, I've got grandchildren I see regularly, and my stepdaughters and my daughter look after me. On that side, I'm very happy. I said, on the public side, I'm in utter despair. Now, it's not I'm in utter despair that we will never make that 55%. It's the damage that's being done to the independence idea by what the present Scottish Green government is doing to the Scottish economy and Scottish society. I think it's doing enormous damage to the idea of independence. And in fact, the remarkable feature is, despite them, we're at 50% in the poll. And therefore, if we can get changes to the national movement's leadership and get a national organisation together, then I think independence can come much quicker than many people realise.
Jim Sillars, I'm looking forward to a new edition of Scotland, the Case for Optimism. Thank you so much for joining me in Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
You're welcome.
Last week, Alex was gallivanting out and about interviewing Gareth Wardell, or Grousebeater as he is better known. Here is a snippet from their fascinating discussion.
Your pen roams far and wide in Grousebeater. You don't stick to politics itself. You have observations on Scotland and where it's going or where it's not going.
I've got that horrific thing called insight into human nature, but that all writers have that. You look at people and say, now, why are they doing that? What's their motivation? So that's where the font comes from, that's where the motivation comes from. And that, against this current onslaught of lies that we're getting, I mean, it's harassment in Andy's book. We've got all the newspapers thrown at us, trying to kill off any idea of independence. But you can't. In history, there's never been a mass movement for greater civil and constitutional rights that's ever gone away, I like to say that no nation has ever risen up to demand its abolition.
And this is what you had to say about that show. Christy says, speaking of Gareth Wardell, loved your words. Scotland is still a democracy and that's what we have to hold tight to. Alan McMahon says, smashing interview with the engaging and accomplished Gareth Wardell, the famous Grousebeater, dinna miss. Pam says a really good hidden hero would be Tommy Douglas, the prairie giant. Born in Falkirk, but voted the best Canadian ever a few years ago, a brilliant politician who transformed Canada. Geronimo says, great and very interesting show as always. Very much enjoy watching these getting my eggs ready on a Sunday morning for Scotland. Well, of course, Geronimo knows we broadcast at 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning, but I presume that you're watching it on catch-up. Pilar says, great to see Grousebeater in good form on the Alex Salmond Show. And please do keep your comments coming in because we do love to read them. Now to Alex's favourite part of the show, Scotland's Hidden Heroes in association with Flagship Media.
Well, actually, it's not really a hidden hero this week. It's a heroine, and not hidden but celebrated. Because if we're doing a show as we are on 25 years of Devolution, there is only one person to have comment on that show, and here it is, Scotland's heroine, the late Winnie Ewing.
I have the opportunity to say a few words, and I want to start with words I've always wanted either to say or hear someone say. The Scottish Parliament adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707 is hereby reconvened. I really couldn't say that until you'd all sworn the oath and really been convened. Well, it's a historic day, and I'm aware, in a long time in politics, that we owe a debt to many who are not here, who didn't live to see the promised land. I'd like to mention a few across parties. Arthur Donaldson and Robert McIntyre, Alec Buchanan Smith, Johnny Bannerman, Emrys Hughes, John McIntosh, and John Smith, and it's today that his 5th anniversary of his death is. And I'd like also to mention Alan McCartney, my colleague until so recently, who so nearly lived to see the day. Now, there's so many other names, and I've only gone for people of my own friendship that I've known. But there's so many names in the history books, named, and people not in the history books, who have made this history possible. I would like to give my thanks to every one of them. I have been in 2 parliaments, as everyone knows, I think. I was 8 years in the House of Commons and 23 years in the European Parliament. Not so long if you say it quickly. I'm the mother of the European Parliament still until July, and I hasten to add not the oldest, though I'm the oldest here, which is very disconcerting. I think they made a mistake in my birth certificate somewhere. But I've several practical hopes, very sincerely, for this Parliament. The first hope is that we try to follow the more consensual style of the European Parliament, and that we can say goodbye to the badgering and backbiting that seems to one associate with Westminster. Secondly, in the Commons, I found that there was a Speaker's tradition of being fair to minorities. And I'm an expert in being a minority, because I was alone in the House of Commons for 3 years and alone in the European Parliament for 19 years. But I have to say, we're all minorities now, and I hope the presiding officer, whoever that may be, will be fair to each and every one of us. My next hope is that this Parliament, by its mere existence, will create better relations with England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, which is what I believe is in the hearts of the peoples of all these countries. And my last practical hope is that everyone born in Scotland, whether they were born, like me, can't help it, or whether they have chosen Scotland as their country, will live in harmony together with us all, enjoying our cultures plural, but being loyal to their own. Out there in Europe and in the world, the greater world, there is a bank of goodwill towards Scotland, and I was privileged to visit 28 countries of the Third World in my Third World Committee. And I met many heads of state and struggling countries with problems, and many a head of state said to me, "What's taking the Scots so long?" And I know that there will be such a lot of goodwill in all these countries of the world. I've served in the Lomé Assembly, which is the European Parliament plus half the world. And I think one of the proudest moments was when Lomé came to Inverness, half the world. And we made a declaration which is part of a sort of international law called the Declaration of Inverness. And we swept away in that declaration the last vestiges of apartheid. Thus, we played a constructive role on the international stage, and we earned the admiration of all who attended from Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. I have a pledge to make on behalf of my party to make this Parliament work. We all here can make it work, and we can make it a showpiece of modern democracy. It's no secret that this Parliament is, to us, not quite the fulfilment of our dream, but it's a Parliament we can build a dream on. Because our dream is to be as sovereign as Denmark or Finland or Austria, no more, no less. But we know that this dream can only come true with the total consensus of the people of Scotland, and that we accept. I would like to end by quoting from the debate of 1707, and I've chosen a passage from Lord Belhaven, who was an opponent of the treaty, and this is what he said then. Show me a spurious patriot, a bombastic fire-eater, and I will show you a rascal. Show me a man who loves all countries equally with his own, and I will show you a man who lacks any sense of proportion. But show me a man who, while he respects all countries equally with his own, yet is ready to defend the rights of his own against them all, and I will show you a man who is both a nationalist and an internationalist. 1707 was said to be, was it not, the end of an old sang? Well, we all here together can begin to write a new Scottish song, and I would urge all of you to sing it in harmony fortissimo. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, some of the themes I was exploring today with Jim Sillars were also the subject of a major conference on 25 years of devolution from Holyrood sources. Take a look at what they had to say.
I have the opportunity to say a few words, and I want to start with words I've always wanted either to say or hear someone say.
Start with the words that I always wanted to say or to hear someone else say. This Parliament that was adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707 is hereby reconvened. If I could be controversial, is that okay, Jeff? Do you mind?
Please. I don't think we mind that. Right. I think that's going to be okay.
I didn't think he'd mind.
Yeah.
No, but I think there's really one very, very obvious risk for the SNP, which is if we remain in this deal with a party which I think is pretty extreme, then at the 2026 election, people are going to say, well, hang on a second, if I vote SNP, I'm going to get the Greens in government again. Now, it's nothing personal, but I'm not sure that that's going to be a popular choice. So I think, I mean, you hear from Alex Salmond later, and, you know, good friend with Alec, and you know, his leadership was outstanding, nearly took the country towards independence. But ironically, the big beneficiary, I think, of the 26 elections, this is my theory, you heard it from me first, will be Alex Salmond and the Alba Party, because lots of people that strongly support independence but don't want the Greens are going to go for Alba, who are very nearly on the point of a threshold in a couple of seats of Scotland, unlike last time where they were just getting started. So there's a theory. You heard it from me first. Free, no charge at all.
You know, what's the counterfactual here? Scotland had been administered for 120 years, and we'd had a kind of taxi full of Tories, as we talked about, you know, in the 90s running Scotland. I mean, you know, the counterfactual of not having a Scottish Parliament would just have been a democratic affront.
I want to, I suppose, just consider the atmosphere of the time, both kind of politically, I suppose, in the country as well. I want to play just a short bit of Tam Dalyell and George Robertson, just for a bit of a sense of the mood of the time.
We will go down a motorway to a separate state, a journey on which many of us don't want to embark.
If you have an institution that calls itself as a parliament, they want more and more and more.
Look, and let me make a harsh political point here, that I believe that from 2014, with Alec leaving, the nature of politics changed in Scotland. And I think today that the nature of that change has meant that there is no unity of purpose in Scottish politics. After 25 years. We are more divided now than we've been in the last 25 years.
And what we're wanting to see is returning power to people in their nation and in their communities. Jonathan, thank you very
much. It was possible for people inside political parties to disagree with each other without getting expelled, or you know, to state a case on behalf of their constituents. I mean, I could mention a whole bundle of names of people that Donald Gorrie in the Lib Dems, Mike Rumbles, Margot MacDonald in the SNP, even Phil Galley in the Tories. And, you know, on our benches, Malcolm Chisholm, John McCallion, lots of people who had opinions on things and would express them. And I think the Parliament's lost that.
No more deals, no coalition. The Scottish National Party has the numbers in Parliament here in Edinburgh to govern alone. Delivering on their manifesto depends on decisions in Westminster. But the numbers are extraordinary in a voting system that makes majorities much harder to achieve.
I'm honoured to announce that on Thursday, the 18th of September 2014, we will hold Scotland's referendum, a historic day where the people will decide Scotland's future. For me as leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues and the dream shall never die.
Please welcome Alex Salmond. Have a seat. Great to see you, Mr. Salmond. Alec, thank you for being here. 25 years of devolution. You were there right at the start. You're still there today. How are you reflecting?
Well, I'm not still there today. That's the key problem. I mean, I can see that, absolutely.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back. I think today's interview probably gave some of our younger viewers an indication of the intellectual force that Jim Sillars was and is as a commentator and participant in the Scottish political scene for over half a century. As I pointed out to Jim, the first half of his contribution was in a time where Scotland had no parliament. The second half has been since devolution. Jim was a devil sceptic, which is quite interesting in a way because it was his victory in the Govan by-election of 1988, which probably more than any other single factor thrust Labour into the Constitutional Convention and bound them to a commitment to a devolved Parliament. Jim's difficulty was he thought that by attaching itself to devolution, that the Scottish National Party, the forces of independence, would kind of find themselves imprisoned in that format. In fact, Jim and indeed Gordon Wilson, the former SNP leaders, opposition to the referendum, participating in the referendum in 1997, was actually quite useful to me, because it meant that the Labour Party, Donald Dewar, had to make concessions to bring myself and the SNP on board that campaign. And of course it was right to be in the Yes Yes campaign, and it was great to have Scotland's Parliament reconvened, as Winnie so gloriously said, after 300 years. And there's no doubt that in the period of the Parliament, by giving the SNP and the forces of independence a platform and a respectability and part of the furniture of politics, it brought independence much, much closer. And the period from 1999, when the Parliament started, to 2014 and the independence referendum, saw a progress more rapid than anybody could have possibly imagined. It seemed inevitable that Scotland, even after the referendum, was on the very brink of independence. And if you'd asked people, say at the beginning of 2015, just less than 10 years ago, will Scotland be independent in the next 10 years? About 70% of people in Scotland said, yeah, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but 10 years, absolutely certainly. That confidence in the inevitable progress towards independence has been somewhat dented. Indeed, a poll for an event last week on the 25th anniversary of Devolution showed that figure now more like 38–40%. Now, it doesn't have to be like that. There is no doubt that having the platform of a parliament makes independence fundamentally more likely. But that doesn't mean that some of Jim Sillars' criticism shouldn't be taken to heart. Because if a nationalist administration allows itself to be prisoned within the confines of the parliament, then it will find itself blamed for things that it cannot possibly avoid. The austerity programme of the last 14 years of Conservative government, the implications of that for public services. If an SNP administration finds itself not able to have the humility to address the issues of competence which are being levelled at it, then of course many of the charges against it will be justified, and they'll combine with the unjustified ones to make the SNP and by extension the cause of independence unpopular. If we lose a defined route to independence because of Westminster obstructionism, because the Westminster government doesn't lie down and do whatever we tell them, and if we can't have the wit and the wisdom to think of a way forward, then of course people will lose heart in the inevitability of independence. And that figure of 38% believing it's likely within 10 years will diminish further. But it doesn't have to be like that. Governments can re-establish their reputation for competence, and given some of the blows that have hammered in on it, it's maybe surprising that so much of that reputation remains. Parties can rediscover the humility to realise what a privilege it is to govern in a Scottish Parliament. And above all, parties can work out the strategy to get Scotland to where it needs to go for the betterment and fulfilment, not of our ambitions, but the betterment and fulfilment of the lives of the people of Scotland. It just needs working out an agreed strategy and the confidence to bring it to implementation, and the realisation that the future of Scotland doesn't lie in the stars, it lies in ourselves and in working out that defined strategy to take Scotland to freedom. And now back to Tasmina, who's going to close out today's show.
Well, with that, and sadly, we come to the end of this week's show, which we do hope you have thoroughly enjoyed. We look forward to seeing you again next week, as Alex usually says, for the Fitbat, or I think this week he said for the footer, and on every social media channel you can shake a stick at. We look forward to seeing you then. Until then, do take good care of yourselves. Bye for now.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.